So we were discussing, so we were discussing in the last class. I don't know whether this is the slide we're supposed to be on, channel. Could you just take it back maybe a couple of slides? Yeah, this is good. Yeah, the next one's good. Number 5 is good. Yeah. So, so we were discussing in the last class positivist social science, and we spoke about what kind of assumptions positivism will make about the nature of reality. And I said that for positivists, reality is something that is out there. It can be discovered through observation, and that we assume that we can find patterns in this reality. So the point of science and the point of scientific inquiry is to be able to find these patterns and understand the order. Just give me 1 second. Yeah. So so the idea then is that what you see in reality, in order to understand these patterns, we know that there is something deeper than what we just see. So what we observe, we record what we observe, but we record it in order to understand that deeper essence. So what you see has a deeper essence, and so even though reality is out there, what we are trying to discover are the laws or the ways of this reality. The other thing that we said is that this reality is also something that is stable, that is more or less stable. So that, the idea that it's constantly in a state of flux and it's constantly being changed by what we are doing, which is what we will discuss when we go into the realm of interpretivism as a perspective. When we think of positivism as a perspective, it's important to understand that reality is something that is stable. Our knowledge about reality is additive. You build on already existing knowledge, so that you find something out about reality, you find or you understand a particular pattern, and then add on to that knowledge. So you move ahead with that knowledge. So all of this we've already covered, that the assumption is that human beings are self-interested, pleasure-seeking, and pain-avoiding rational individuals, and when you assume that human beings are of this kind, you also assume that a particular cause will have this more or less again the same effect on everyone. So so when you think of this external reality, then we know that if I inflict a certain kind of pain on individuals, they will all experience it. It will have the same sort of effect on everyone. So if there is, let's say, if there is an earthquake, then again it will have the same kind of effect on everyone. People will behave in the same way, which is that they will try to run out of their homes, or they will, so this is the kind of patterned response that we are looking at. Now for positivists, what is important is this effect, that a particular cause or a particular sort of shift or a particular change in the reality or a particular event in the reality has on everyone. So it's important to be able to look at this cause, look at this behavior, and then be able to predict a pattern. So now the difference between positivism and interpretivism then is also lies here, because for interpretivists, what is important is this internal subjective feeling. So as a positivist, I'm not so concerned about the internal subjective feeling as I am by what I see, even though I do understand that what I see I mean, that my explanation or my understanding needs to go beyond what I see, right? So I could say that in the situation of an earthquake, I find that this is how individuals react. So the cause is the earthquake, the earth shaking, and the effect then is of trying to run away from or running away from your homes, finding a safe place, and so on. For an interpretivist, it'll be far more important to think about, well, what is behind this running away? What is the internal subjective state that human beings or people find themselves in when there is an earthquake? Now, in positivist social science, then we take what is called a mechanical model of human beings, and it means that these external behaviors, documenting these external behaviors when outside forces act on them, is sufficient to provide an explanation of human thought and action. So what you're looking at, you're looking at these external behaviors, you're looking at possible patterns in these external behaviors to then think about what sorts of explanations can we find. Now, I think I brought this up in the last class that one of the thinkers that are important in the positivist sort of frame of looking at things, or positivist frame of understanding society, is Emile Durkheim, who who stated that that social phenomena can and ought to be studied as things, right? And here he meant that these are things, the social facts are therefore independent of the actions of human beings and the will of human beings. So again, what you're doing here is that you're focusing on the external observable reality, and you're saying that this reality is stable. It doesn't get altered by individual human motivations. Um, yeah. Yeah. Next slide, please. So what we do is that that therefore they are in some ways, these, when we think of a social fact, they have to be considered separately from these individual motivations. They have to be considered in isolation from individual manifestations. So again, I think in some ways you also see this as being connected to what we did initially about with C. Wright Mills and this whole idea of a sociological imagination, when you say a private trouble and a public issue. So what he was trying to say is that every private trouble is actually connected to a public issue. So here again, we are arguing that there will be individual manifestations of social phenomena, but what you're really interested in is not the individual manifestation, but the broad patterns of social phenomena. And we can see this when we discuss suicide in greater detail, because again, suicide is what we call a deeply individual act. But when Durkheim studies it, he and looks at it as a social phenomenon, looks at it as a social fact which can be treated as a thing. He precisely, he makes this case that you can remove it, you can isolate it from its individual manifestations, and then study aspects of it which have crystallized in certain ways. Crystallized in the sense of having certain rules, certain sort of fixed ways in which this social phenomena operates. And therefore, it's independent of these sorts of subjective feelings or subjective impressions. Yes, next slide, please. So the next question then is, in positivism, is how do we think of human agency? And here again, you see that what you're focusing on are the external forces. What are the external forces that act on individuals to create a particular social phenomena, that produce a certain kind of structure or a certain kind of effect? And so in that sense, the individual manifestations of any social event or any social phenomena are actually downplayed what is at the forefront of our analysis are these external forces that are acting on individuals. So the focus really is on sort of some of these larger structural forces in determining how social phenomena, what social phenomena are. And mental processes or subjective feelings are less central to um, to positivists and to those who take on a positivist approach in studying social phenomena. So now there is a kind then of determinism in understanding this the view of human agency, determinism in understanding these relationships. And what do I mean by determinism here? Here I'm really saying that what is it that that determines human agency? What is it that shapes human agency? Human agency is shaped by the structure, by these external forces, by this observable empirical reality which is outside of you as an agent. So more or less, people, those who use positivism as an approach will tend to think of sort of these large causal laws which shape how individuals, which shape our understanding of how individual behaves. Now, um, yes, go ahead.
I had a, like why were such ideas popular, right? Isn't it like very obvious that everybody in a particular situation might not react exactly the same? Like why were positivists trying to like basically
Yeah.
make
Yes.
some certain rules for everyone?
Yeah, I get your question. So I think what you're asking is that, despite the sort of very obvious understanding that, um, if you have when you have individuals, then there will be various individual manifestations, and yet you have this kind of focus on a particular way of seeing and understanding something, right? And why does positivism why is even positivism an approach, a popular approach, or an approach that
Yes,
people are using? Is that what you're asking, Kuldeep?
yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So now I think the answer to that lies in the fact that you are looking at the beginnings of a discipline which was, and this is why I said, background is important, and why positivism is popular, or was popular, and even now I think we study it as an approach because you can still use this as a way of guiding what kind of research you do within sociology. But positivism, when the discipline emerged, it was popular only because here is a discipline that was actually trying to model itself along the lines of the natural sciences. So now you may say, of course, that many of the natural sciences have also advanced and recognized and problematized some of these aspects. But what it was really trying to do, and also that, when we study positivism in this manner, we are also studying it in a kind of ideal typical way. We are studying it in terms of, like, what are its ideal typical characteristics. Of course, when you begin to use this as an approach for research, you will make certain concessions to say that, okay, causal laws are probabilistic, right? When you think of some of these laws of behavior, human behavior, they're not written in stone. That there will be sort of variations as far as individual manifestations are concerned. But is it possible for us to use this method or use this approach to come up with certain generalizations, to come up with certain patterns? And again, when we do suicide, you'll see that, how Durkheim is actually able to do this. So the understanding that it is still possible to come up with these sorts of laws governing human behavior, to come up with, to arrive at certain generalizations or patterns of human behavior. That is what drives the positivist approach. So its popularity, I think, in the initial years of the discipline, is tied to this kind of motivation of establishing sociology as a science, and its use further down the road, and its continued use now, I think, is in terms of partly again in terms of that, partly again in terms of sort of retaining a certain what you would call a scientific rigor in how research is conducted, how an understanding of human society is built. But I think partly it's also in terms of the value of recognizing a particular sort of mode of engaging with the discipline. And so you would find that those who that if I take a positivist kind of approach, then I'm far more likely to engage in what is called a survey design of research. So that I would actually try and do a large survey, or that I would try and, in the current context, that I could also try and look at sort of large sets of data, which will be able to communicate some of these connections between different social aspects or social institutions, in order to arrive again at certain generalizations. So when Durkheim was doing his study of suicide, what he was doing was that he was looking at the data on suicide in Europe over a period of time, to then say, okay, what sorts of groups of people, among what sorts of groups of people was suicide common, at what points was it common, and try and relate it to different things that were going on in society. Yes, Kuldeep, does that answer your question?
Yes, my friend.
So going back to the positivist method, positivism as an approach. Sorry, we are also then trying to So I think I was saying that that even within positivism, as I said, we arrive at these causal laws, but we can also say that these causal laws are in some ways probabilistic. They will enable us to make certain sort of judgments or certain assumptions about or certain predictions about how human beings will behave. So that if I establish this kind of understanding that faced with a sort of natural disaster or calamity, people will run towards what they consider is a safe space. So it then enables me to predict how human beings will behave when there is any such sort of event, right? Now, how a specific person will behave may actually be different, right? So that I may have, for instance, old people who live in living in a home, who will not want to move out, who will just say that it's better whatever happens here, and I'm not. So you see that as a kind of difference, and that you're not able to then accurately predict what an old person may actually do in these conditions. So what you're doing is that you're establishing certain causal relations, but you're clear that you're establishing them in a kind of probabilistic way. Now then we come to this question of what is the relationship between common sense and science. And in positivism, we understand there's a very clear separation between science and non-science, and common sense is the realm of the non-science. And so of all the ways of sort of understanding society, science is the best, right? So that science is the way to to seek truth, is to arrive at truth. Science is the way to understand. And when I take this understanding, then common sense has no place. Common sense does not have any place in this understanding. So, but what science does is that we borrow from common sense. So I might be wanting to use scientific explanations, use only science, but I draw on common sense. So when I'm looking at a particular social fact, and this is particularly true for sociology as a discipline, that I have to draw from common sense, because what I'm looking at is people's realities, people's social conditions. And in order to do that, it is important to draw on common sense, which is what people in their everyday engagements are also drawing from. Now, so you borrow from common sense, but you also remove those aspects which are considered to be sloppy or inconsistent or logically inconsistent. So it goes back to our understanding of rationality, so that in some senses what you're also trying to do is build this kind of understanding of logic and rationality. And even though you use things from common sense, you don't consider those aspects which appear logically inconsistent. Now, so explanation or so when I say this kind of thing of parts of common sense that are sloppy or logically inconsistent, I think what you are hinting at is the individual manifestations of, or individual explanations of certain things. So that within those individual explanations, there may be concepts or ideas which are outside of science. So it is important for those who are using positivism to recognize what those ideas are and not go with them. So I may, if I continue to use, for instance, tradition or a tradition or certain religious beliefs in order to explain phenomena, those are individual ways of explaining it. And those individual manifestations, which may not be, which are in the realm of common sense, but I know that these cannot then form my general causal laws of how people behave. So often the doing away with the inconsistent parts in common sense is also connected to the doing away with the individual manifestations or individual explanations. So my next question then is, what is it? How do I explain? What is explanation or theory when I use positivism as an approach? And here we know that explanation is what is called nomothetic. This means that it is based on a system of general laws. So it relies heavily on trying to arrive at law-like generalizations and law-like statements and interpretations. So what I want to focus on when I am using positivism is to be able to connect phenomena, is to be able to connect aspects of a social phenomena through a relationship of causality. So I will say again, when you look at suicide, Durkheim's Suicide, what he was trying to do is say, okay, what is the connection between solidarity and people taking their own lives, people dying, right? And social solidarity and that. So you're making an interrelationship between two aspects when you're observing or when you're trying to understand a phenomena. So these laws, when you think of these laws, they operate according to a very clear and strict logical reasoning, and which means that you can observe facts and you can deductively connect the facts that you are observing. And it is through these sorts of connection that you can arrive at what are the certain general patterns. So you use logical reasoning in order to connect these facts, and then you arrive at some laws which are universally valid. Now, even as you arrive at these laws that are universally valid, you know that there will be individual manifestations, right? But what we are concerned about is the sort of, let's say, 90% applicability of this kind of universally valid laws. Next slide, please. Yeah. So now, now when you think of this question of validity, I think, or something that is universally valid, and how do you understand if something is universally valid or not? I think you're also coming up with the question of this question of additive knowledge. So I may say that there is a linkage between, let's say, unemployment and domestic violence. Yeah. And if I have found this linkage to be true in a certain context, where I have used, let's say, a large-scale survey in a certain context, and it's on that context that I say it's true. Now, the same, you may use that to then examine the relationship either between unemployment and domestic violence, or between unemployment and something else. To then add on to that existing knowledge. So sometimes, so it will, for as Karl Popper would say, you would have a conjecture and then a refutation. So even within a positivist sort of frame, you could take that same route of a conjecture and a refutation, so that I could begin with the idea that, okay, increase in unemployment means that there is an increase in domestic violence. Yeah? And I could test this out in other contexts. So testing it out would mean that you add to the knowledge, you sort of you improve on that idea of probability that this is true for a larger number of people, or you may find contexts where this is not true, right? That unemployment does not lead to increase in domestic violence, right? Or you could say that, in fact, what unemployment does is that it leads to better childcare arrangements, let's say. So what I'm doing here is that you see that you can build on a particular causal relationship that you've established to either to make that stronger or to come up with another sort of conjecture. So to then falsify it and come up with another conjecture. So so then in positivism, the truth or falsity of an explanation should meet these two conditions. One, that it should have no logical contradictions, and that it should be consistent with facts that have been observed in the particular study, right? So again, it's consistent with observed facts in a particular study. Now, observed facts in some other study may be different and therefore may either falsify or validate the particular the observations or the conclusions from one study. So, so when you think of good sort of factual evidence in positivist social science, what does this look like? We are making a separation here between fact and value. So cold observable facts are distinct from ideas, values, or theories. And what we are basing our conclusions on are these cold observable facts which we have experienced by using our sense organs. So then what you're relying on, again, going back to this whole idea of reason and so on, the application of reason and so on, what you're relying on is your own sort of sense organs, and that is what makes this knowledge valid. So Yeah. So what you are giving a very privileged, you have a very privileged position that you give to empirical observation, and you believe that you know all individuals share sort of this fundamental experience the of the empirical world, and therefore the observed facts are not just the observed facts of one person, and they're not dependent on the subjective reasoning of one person. Uh, um, rather, um, yeah. Yeah, so that then there can be, you know, what we call, there can be two kinds of languages of experience of expressing this, the language of empirical facts and the language of abstract theory. And what you know so the language of sort of abstract ideas is different from the language of empirical fact. In positivism, we are more focused on what emerges from this observed facts. I don't want, you know, I'm not necessarily then going into this whole realm of the subjective interpretations of empirical fact. And that subjective interpretation can be very different. So again, I'm using the word interpretation. When we go into the interpretivist frame, you will see that it is that interpretation that becomes very important. So it's my ideas around how the world is organized, around how that social reality is organized, that becomes important. Next slide, please. So again, we are coming back to Popper, and I have mentioned this, that that this conjecture and refutation is a way of advancement of knowledge, which means that you discover a particular causal law, you put it out there in your community of scholars, and it is now open to refutation, which means that based on other empirical facts, based on other sorts of observations, anybody is now free to refute what you have found. And so till it is refuted, it stands as established knowledge. So this process of conjectures and refutations and falsification of a particular kind of understanding based on other observations of facts, this is the process of the advancement of knowledge. So the fact is that, you know, according to Popper, knowledge can never fully be proven or fully justified. They can only be refuted. So your knowledge is good as long as it is not being refuted. It works as long as it's not being refuted. So what you're doing as researchers is that you're looking for evidence that that disconfirms a particular statement or a particular way of understanding or a particular statement of understanding, right? Now, what is the relevance of this knowledge that you gain through this positivist approach? The positivist approach believes that the relevance of social science knowledge is in some ways to improve and alter the social conditions. In some ways, it can exercise sort of control over social behavior. So therefore, knowledge is not simply for knowledge's sake. There's an instrumental orientation to why we are seeking to understand social behavior and social reality. We are seeking to understand it in order to be able to control it better, in order to be able to alter our social conditions. So there's an instrumental orientation and what is called a technocratic perspective in the application of knowledge. So what we are doing is that we use it in a sort of in a technical sense. We use it to reach certain goals and objectives. We define certain goals and objectives, and we are using knowledge to actually reach those goals and objectives. So there is a kind of bureaucratic sort of reasoning to why we collect knowledge, why we sort of need these forms of knowledge and what we do with them. What is the place of socio-political value? Again, I said there is a separation between fact and value. So really, we think of it as value-free, science as being value-free. And so when we say that it's objective and it's value-free, we are really saying that one, that observers agree on what they see, and two, that scientific knowledge is not really based on individuals' values, opinions, attitudes, and beliefs. It's independent of this. So it's independent. Science operates independently of the social and cultural forces in society. And when you are a scientist, then what you do is you internalize the norms of the scientific community. Internalizing the norms of the scientific community is one way of distancing yourself from the common sense. One way of being able to recognize what are the common sense explanations, and then saying, okay, this is what I need to weed out in order to arrive at explanations that are scientific. Now, when you're part of this community, again, there is an elaborate system of checks and balances. So I think if you look at sort of the earlier point that I was making with regard to Karl Popper and falsification, and I said, look, you have a conjecture, you put it out there. So what you do when you put it out there, you're putting it out there for the scientific community. So you have like processes of peer review, you're expected to publish your work in journals, and that's the way in which you internalize some of these norms of the scientific community. So when you're doing research, when you are a researcher, when you want to find answers, you must submit to these norms of the community. And what this community does is keeps you in check in terms of not falling into the trap of any kind of biases connected to values and so on. So your proper role as a scientist then is of a disinterested scientist. Yeah, so I think more or less this is sort of the positivist social science. I think we have two more slides, which are by way of an example, which is the use of Durkheim's suicide. I'm just going to give you a 5-minute break. Don't go away anywhere. But before I begin talking about Durkheim, I'm going to take just a short 5-minute break and then come back.
Hi everyone. So I hope everyone has submitted their first assignment so far. Are you guys listening? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How many of you not submitted? I think there are a lot of people who still have not submitted. So I just request you to just try to submit as soon as you can. Also, how are you guys finding these classes? Are you able to like come to terms with the concepts and like grasp whatever ma'am is saying?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I was expecting you guys to talk a little, but seems like you all are just tired because it's a morning class. I can understand like how tiring it can be and exhausting.
Chanel,
Yes, ma'am.
um, can we try to show some videos? You think it'll work or?
Yes, ma'am. Which just let me know what video like should I play? Some YouTube video.
Yeah, these are all YouTube videos. 1 second, let me tell you. I'll put it on the, maybe I'll put it on the chat. Huh?
All right.
There was a human tragedy that we heard about today, which has an important lesson for all of us and our children. A young boy
Okay, I'm trying to send the video to you. I wasn't able to locate the YouTube link because I have it saved, so I don't.
All right, ma'am. Or you could also share the video. I mean, yeah, just or you can just tell me the name. I'll just share it.
I don't know the name also. I mean, I tried looking for it. Let me just see if this it'll go through. Yeah, well, I've sent it to your Gmail.
All right, ma'am. Just playing.
Yeah, let's.
Ma'am, just let me know if it's audible.
Yeah.
Heard about today, which has an important lesson for all of us and our children.
Is it?
It's audible. Yeah, you can make it full screen or whatever.
Right.
Is everybody able to view and hear it?
Yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, let's play this.
Please.
I guess you have to unmute yourself.
Channel, you'll have to unmute yourself. And play it from the beginning, maybe.
There was a human tragedy that we heard about today, which has an important lesson for all of us and our children. A young boy with a violin leaving behind a message about kids and callousness and the awful wounds we cannot see. Lindsay Davis has this story.
At Rutgers University, freshman Darun Ravi had an idea to be a peeping Tom. He used a web camera in his dorm room to spy on his roommate. What he saw, he broadcast live across the internet. His roommate was having a sexual encounter with a male student. He tweeted, "Roommate asked for the room till midnight. I went into Molly's room and turned on my webcam. I saw him making out with a dude. Yay." His roommate was 18-year-old Tyler Clementi, an accomplished violinist. The invasion of privacy appears to have been too much for him. His family says Clementi went to a New York City bridge after learning of the incident and ended his life. A recent study found that 9 out of 10 gay kids reported being harassed, and that gay kids are 4 times more likely than straight kids to commit suicide. Earlier this week in Houston, Texas, the parents of Asher Brown said their gay son turned a gun on himself and committed suicide after being a victim of bullying. He was just 13 years old.
Social media now means that young gay kids today can have some help and support.
Writer Dan Savage started a YouTube channel where gay adults can post videos to encourage gay teens that however bad it is, it gets better.
If you are someone who is being picked on or bullied or called names, let me tell you this, it will get better.
This support comes too late for Clementi's family. Late this afternoon, they released this statement. The family is heartbroken beyond words. Authorities arrested Ravi and friend Molly Way for transmitting sexual images without consent, a third-degree crime. They have not commented, but face up to 5 years in prison. Lindsay Davis, ABC News, New York.
And you can hear more about Dan Savage's project, It Gets Better, in today's conversation. Head to abcnews.com/worldnews.
All right, we can get back to the PPT. So that, I'm going to show you 2 or 3 more videos as we go along. But that is just to, that's just one example of suicide, and I'll, I'll just discuss. Yeah. So, yeah, could we go towards to the last 2 slides? I think 12 and 13 and 14 maybe. Yeah, this one. Yeah. So now Durkheim's study of suicide, I'm using this as an example of positivism. Now, what he does is that he, and you can see that the suicide is one of the most sort of its most personal, intimate act, right? And what Durkheim tried to do was that he tried to show how it is connected to certain social facts, how it is a social fact. He recognized suicide as a social fact, and then tried to build certain kind of causal analysis. What is it connected to? What social phenomena is this personal act connected to? So the book, he actually, what he does is he looks at suicide rates, as I said, in Europe, and he finds that there are differences between, for instance, Protestants and Catholics. Is he finds a lower rate of suicide among Catholics, and he also finds that suicide is less common among women, right? So men are more likely to commit suicide than women. It is more common among single people, right, than those who have partners and those who have, and even less common than among those who have children. He also finds that soldiers and veterans are more likely to commit suicide than civilians, and that the rate of suicide is higher during peace times than they are during wars. So these are the sort of this, and I'm just sort of really summarizing for you here. These are sort of the basic findings that he has by looking at these suicide rates. Now, then he tries to say that, okay, if I look at this data, what I'm saying then is that it's not just psychological or emotional factors that you see suicide as being connected to. There are other social factors that it's connected to. And one of the social factors that Durkheim isolates and tries to find a causal relationship with suicide to is social integration. So, to what extent does a person find themselves, do people find themselves integrated to society? What is the strength of the attachment of an individual to society, and to what extent does this integration regulate regulate a person's life? So integration and regulation, the kind of control that is there on people's lives. So based on this, he's does a typology of suicide, and he says that if integration is high, then obviously what happens is that the person is more connected to suicide, and it possesses a feeling of general belonging. And so if you're very well integrated, then you're less likely to commit suicide. But in certain cases, when integration is very high, you may commit suicide. And that type of suicide he calls altruistic suicide, right? And if integration is very low, then you're most likely to commit suicide. And that's that's a kind of weakening of bonds that you have with your family or with the community. And when a person finds himself to be deeply detached, completely detached from society, then that person is likely to commit suicide. Okay, then can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So we have altruistic suicide. There are 4 kinds that he talks about: altruistic, egoistic, fatalistic, and anomic. So we talked about altruistic suicide, where you have high degree of integration, and you also have excessive regulation of individuals by social forces. So an example of this is in terms of those who would commit suicide for the sake of a religious or a political cause. So if I think of the World Trade Tower incident, that would be a sort of that you're committing suicide for a religious or a political cause. In this case, there is a high degree of integration, but there is also excessive regulation of individuals by social forces, and that prompts individuals to kill themselves for the benefit of this larger good, for the benefit of what they think is a larger good. Then you, as I said, you have egoistic suicide, which is when individuals do not feel well integrated with the larger society, with the larger community. So it's a response who feel by people who feel totally detached from society. Now, ordinarily, you are integrated in society through your roles, through the several roles that you play, work roles, your connections to the family, to community, and you have other social bonds. When these social bonds are weakened, and sometimes these social bonds can be weakened, for instance, say through retirement, because if you retire, then you lose friends, you lose, so that among elderly people, this may be a cause for suicide. So the likelihood of suicide increases when these familiar bonds are weakened or when they are no longer there. So when you're dealing with the loss of family and friends, that's then you become susceptible to this kind of suicide, which is egoistic suicide. And then we have what is called fatalistic suicide. And fatalistic suicide is under conditions of extreme social regulation. Now, you see that I also talked about altruistic suicide, where there is excessive regulation. But in altruistic suicide, there's regulation as well as integration, right? In fatalistic suicide, you may not necessarily be integrated because, there's extreme regulation which results from oppressive conditions. So, you may be in a prison or a labor camp or something like that, where, there's complete, or you think about the, the camps, in Germany under Hitler. So you have where there are conditions of extreme social regulation and oppressive conditions, and a complete denial of the self, of the person, of the person's agency. And in such situations, a person may choose to die rather than continuing to endure such oppressive conditions. And finally, he talked about anomic suicide. This is a response by a person who experiences anomie. Anomie is, again, a sense of disconnection from the society, a feeling that you do not belong to society. And this results from a very weak, a condition of weakened social cohesion. And anomie can occur during periods of, so you have that, I mentioned right at I think at some point that, in looking at the suicide rates, Durkheim found that rates of suicide are higher during peacetime than they are during wars, right? So what's interesting is that, after the war, there is a situation of normlessness. So anomie is the situation of normlessness, that after a political upheaval, after, in the context of a social, economic, or political upheaval, there may be extreme or quick changes that take place in society and in people's daily lives. And this may lead to an incapacity of dealing with these quick changes, of figuring out what the new norms are going to be. And that becomes a context then to sort of completely withdraw from the world. So, so these are the 4 kinds of suicide that Durkheim talks about. He develops this typology based on these ideas of integration and regulation. So he says that, okay, suicide is this extremely personal act. How do we think? What are the other things that it's connected to? When I think of it as a social fact, I see and I look at these variations, or I first analyze these contexts in which they have occurred, and this is what it's telling me, that there are other factors, and the social factors that he separates in order to analyze a little bit more is integration and regulation. And he's trying to show us that based on this idea of integration and regulation, what is the typology of suicide that we can arrive at. Now let's go back to the video that you watched, and we'll try and watch a couple of more videos. If we go back to the videos that we watched, the video that we watched, what kind of suicide do you think it is?
Ma'am, I have a question, ma'am.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Ma'am, we just discussed about common sense and the logics connection that we discard all the things which are logically inconsistent with common sense when we form a theory or do some study. Uh, but ma'am, logical inconsistency or sloppiness is a really broad term. For example, the divorce rates. In US, we see many power couples divorce, which is actually not what common sense suggests. So, ma'am, how actually we define it? Like, ma'am, it can be vary to vary from person to person. That what is logical inconsistency in that regard, ma'am? Can you elaborate on that, on some
Yeah.
with some
Yes,
example?
yes, yes. So, see, logical inconsistency in terms of what you have observed and what sorts of conclusions you're arriving at. So, in now again, what suppose in when you if you look at the if you look at Durkheim's work on suicide, right? Um, what what we are seeing is that he looks at these rates of suicide and then he tries to relate or he looks at these rates and then he comes to a certain sort of general conclusions about what these rates signify. So he's saying, okay, it's higher among women, and so you can, that is something that you can glean from the data itself, right? More women have committed suicide. At what points has it been higher? So logical inconsistency would mean to find inconsistencies in that data, so that in fact his conclusions emerge from what he gleans from the data. So as long as that data, what he's gleaned from the data and what he's saying about the data, as long as that is there is a clear reasoning which you can see, it's consistent. So in fact, the sloppiness that we are saying, that the sloppiness of the argument can often be detected precisely in the way that data is data has been handled, or data has been. Now, I may find something else in the data, right? So when I look at the data, if I look at Durkheim, the rates of suicide that Durkheim was looking at, you and I may find some other aspect. So that will only move us into the realm of conjectures and refutations, right? So Durkheim may not have effectively looked at all the angles or all the aspects, or he may not have gleaned everything from the data. So there is that openness in the data. But whatever he has found, is it logically consistent? So therefore, it's important when I'm presenting my data to be able to tell you, this is my data, this is what I have gleaned from it, and this is how I am applying it. This is how I'm using it to understand. If these three steps have been clearly outlined and you are able to see the reasoning that a scholar has followed from step A to, which is from the point of observation to the point of analysis and coming up with an argument, that is logical consistency, right? So it's up to the reader to ascertain whether there is logical consistency. And that's why we said there is a scientific community. If that logical consistency is not there, then that's something that we can throw up for discussion within that community, to say that there is a flaw in how things have been argued in this. And this is possible, I think, when we think of positivism. When you move into the realm of the interpretivist approach, you'll see that this becomes far more complicated, because it's so much about my interpretation of certain kinds of data. And of course, my interpretation will be different from yours. So the way in which we think of consistency in an interpretivist understanding would again be very different. I don't know if that fully answers your question. Was it Vansh who asked it?
Yes, ma'am.
So can you repeat what you were saying about the divorce rates?
Like, ma'am, I'm saying that in USA, many power couples divorce, like Bill Gates recently or many others, which is not something what common sense suggests. So, ma'am, how would a sociologist react to it? Like, if we are doing a study on divorces in America,
Yeah.
and see this data that many power couples and many rich families are having such divorces. How would a sociologist conclude? What would a sociologist would conclude from this?
I don't know. Can anybody, Chanel, what do you think?
It's Vansh, right? Yeah. So you're asking that what is the logical consistency is about. Your question is how do we analyze it, taking the very reference of divorce rates in America, right? Just
Right,
trying
right.
to understand your question. So how do you sociologically analyze this?
Yes.
Uh, First of all, I think
Yeah.
from what we study.
Question, sorry, question really, Chanel, is why do, if I think of, like the super rich, right? Why are they getting divorced? If there is, is there a, but I think before we, Chanel, before you offer your thoughts, one of the things is that what we need to see is, uh, um, for a sociologist, the way to go about it would be to say that, okay, what are the rates? Are the divorce rates really higher among the rich than among the poor? If that is so, then definitely it has something to do with sort of the accumulation of wealth, right? So then one of the general patterns that you find is divorce rates and accumulation of wealth. Yes, Chanel, go on.
Just a second. Yeah, so I was just a second. Yeah. Oh God. Okay. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. Yeah. So, I think from what we talked about in class, we very much made a distinction between how, positivist science, it attempts to make a difference between common sense and science. And I think this clear separation sometimes may be merged. When you actually go out in everyday life, right? Because this is a very valid question and point, or you may have in mind that how do we separate this in practice, especially when you are out in the field and you're observing. How do you even come to how do you even arrive at explanations without really looking at the very prevalent behavior which so the role of sociologists, I think, especially in this area, when you try to study something as divorce rate among rich people in America or the elite group. So I think this is where we actually come in picture, because the way that conventionally science will study the divorce rate of the rich, will be very data based in this sense of numerical data, right? You will do a quantitative analysis of how you will just ask, you might ask a very yes or no questions, and the data will be very simplified in terms of like reaching to conclusions. However, on the other hand, when we talk about social science research, and is your question was about how we can sociologically analyze it. So we focus on qualitative, collecting qualitative data. Not that science does not use it, like the very conventional science does not use qualitative data. But when you come to social science research, the focus is heavily on collecting qualitative data, and that is exactly because we believe that logical consistency itself, it can be a predictable pattern in the environment. Like, of course, it's not the same with everyone. We are not saying that it's all predictable in the sense that it's the facts we believe the facts, social facts, we arrive at it by obviously observing the environment around us, right? So the role of interactive perspective here comes into play, right? How you understand how people may they put meaning to divorce. For example, like the elite group, what is the factor? If they are economically well, what is lacking in the relationship, like for the relationship or the commitment to really hold? So there can be other factors in the picture that maybe you can arrive at an hypothesis that maybe time is the reason, right? That they don't spend enough time together, the couple. or you can bring in, there can be multiple hypotheses that you can arrive at and you can really prove it. So it's really, I mean, even I am trying to really think about this question that you asked, like because it's a very broad question, right? So
Can I come in here? And I was just putting in the chat. I think some of you are writing about what you think is why why the rich will divorce. Yes, Himanshu.
I think
You're very yeah. The volume is very low. Others, can you hear Himanshu? I can't hear you.
no, ma'am.
Himanshu, why don't you write? Yeah, so if you can see, there's the point about property and taxes. So one of the reasons why people divorce is, yeah,
Ma'am,
go
am I
ahead.
audible? Sorry
Yeah.
for the interruption. Sorry for the interruption. So, ma'am, as when one of the reason that where I was aware of, like once asked that the Bill Gates, the why rich people divorce is just because of like extramarital affair, that usually wealthy people don't, have that great understanding of what exactly about their uh, life partners, or they usually, ma'am, deviate from the human values or something like that, and because of that they could not value something, they usually devalue that thing. So I think that is the one reason. Wealth is, I think, play a very important role, because in India also we see like there is a statistics, rich people divorcing as compared to the economical, the poor people, or like the people who are not rich. So I mean, like we can
Yeah.
correlate to this fact as well.
So I think when you come up, most of you are writing here. You see that what we what we are seeing is sort of what are called sort of individual manifestations. Now, interestingly, I would think that actually the rich. This is my understanding, and again, we are all drawing on common sense here. We can look at the data. I mean, it'll be interesting to look at what the data says, and maybe for the next class we can do that. But I would imagine that the poor are more likely to divorce than the rich, because the rich, they have a lot more to lose in terms of, again, like somebody mentioned, in terms of how their estates and their property and all of that is organized. You will find that you're less likely to. I mean, this is again, it's conjecturing. You're less likely to divorce if you are rich, and more likely to divorce if you are poor. If you're rich, you're also more likely to have access to sort of various, counseling and various other measures to actually keep that arrangement, the marital arrangement, going. And so even in the context of a break where, these kinds of things of individuality or passion or whatever, when those things become sort of divergent, it is possible for the rich to figure out arrangements, right? You can actually continue to live your lives without really having to really engage with each other. And for the poor, it's not possible. So then, they're again more likely to divorce. So maybe we can think about, Vansh, thank you for that question. I think it's got us all thinking. So I think we could maybe come back with some more sort of definitive data on the rates of divorce, and we could do this for India and just look up on the net and see what's available. We can do this for both India and US and try to build a comparative understanding of why, what sorts of, so again, social factors are responsible for, for these rates of divorce. So should we get some volunteers? Because the last time I think I talked about asking you to read up on Industrial and French Revolution